hit that like button and subscribe.
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are discussing one of the most fundamental, and I'd argue high-stakes contracts in civil society, marriage. Recent analysis of U.S. family structure data highlights a really persistent demographic reality. While the marriage rate itself has shifted, the rate of dissolution remains stubbornly high with, nearly half of all marriages ending in divorce or separation. This is a crucial area of study because the end of a marriage triggers this enormous economic and social reorganization, and it fundamentally alters the distribution of assets, resources, and even parental roles. So the question before us today is, I think, very direct and necessary. Given this persistent rate of marital dissolution and the structural consequences that follow, does the institution of marriage still offer a net benefit to men, or has it fundamentally evolved into a financial and social arrangement that poses a, frankly, disproportionate risk to their interests?
Right.
My position is that the potential payoff, and I'm talking specifically about the superior long-term outcomes we see for children and the greater accumulated wealth for the intact family unit, are so substantial that they really do outweigh the calculated risk of dissolution, provided, and this is key, provided men approach the institution with strategic awareness and intelligent selection.
And I come at it from a different perspective. I would argue that we have to focus on the rules of the contract's termination, not just its potential for success. I think the legal and structural realities surrounding divorce present an inherent asymmetrical risk, financially and custodially, that makes marriage for many men today fundamentally unfavorable. It demands extreme, defensive caution.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's begin by defining the terms of that risk. You argue that the risk profile is asymmetrical. How do you quantify that lack of parity for men entering the marriage contract?
Well, the asymmetry is really defined by two things: agency in dissolution and the resulting economic consequence. I mean, if marriage were a true 50-50 partnership in terms of entry and exit, the initiation of dissolution should be symmetrical. But it's just not. Wives are the ones who file for divorce far more often, on average 66% of cases, sometimes spiking up to nearly 75% depending on the demographic in the year. This fact alone means that the man is entering a contract whose terms of ending are overwhelmingly controlled by the other party. The agency to terminate rests largely outside his hands. And that agency gap, it matters profoundly when we look at the financial consequences. The post-divorce financial reality for the man is immediate and it's persistent. Household income drops sharply, by half at the moment of divorce. And crucially, while there is some partial recovery over time, that household income remains roughly 30% below pre-divorce levels a full decade later. This is a sustained financial erosion that really defines the risk.
Okay.
And then that financial erosion is compounded by a profound mismatch in labor and custody outcomes. Post-divorce, fathers increase their weekly work hours significantly by 16% compared to an 8% increase for mothers. So the man increases his labor contribution at the very time of crisis. Yet, despite working substantially more, they rarely secure primary custody. The data is clear. 90% of divorced mothers have custody of the children. So men are locked into this pattern of increased labor for diminished family presence and a substantial, lasting financial hit. I mean, that is the very definition of asymmetrical risk.
Yeah, and I do acknowledge those figures. They reflect a very challenging reality for men post-divorce. I mean, 90% custody loss is a figure that absolutely demands attention. But let me give you a necessary counterbalance, one that shifts the focus from the cost of failure to the long-term value generated by success and stability. We have to view this through the lens of maximizing positive human outcomes, especially for the children.
Okay.
When we look at the positive side, the protective power of family stability it's overwhelming. Children of always married parents have vastly superior long-term outcomes across critical sociological metrics. For instance, their mortality rate is 0.83%, compared to 1.23% for children whose parents divorced. Their incarceration rate is 0.15% versus 0.46% for children of divorced parents. We aren't talking about small marginal benefits here. This represents a monumental improvement in public and personal well-being. The institution, when successful, generates immense value.
But the point remains. A man enters a contract where the odds of severe personal loss are fixed at 50%, simply by virtue of the high divorce rate. You're asking him to accept a 50% chance of catastrophic financial and custodial loss purely for that potential upside.
That's where the element of selection and strategy transforms the debate. The population failure rate of 50% is not the fixed risk for any specific, well-selected marriage. The data shows that the smartest course for a man today is actively managing that risk through conscious timing and partner selection. The risk is manageable, you see, not inherent.
Right.
You mentioned timing. Those who wait to marry until after age 25, for example, are 24% less likely to get divorced. Income matters hugely. High family income, specifically over $50,000 annually, decreases the risk by 30% compared to lower income groups. Even aligning on core values provides a buffer. Having strong religious beliefs decreases divorce risk by 14%. So yes, the structural risks exist, but the protective measures available allow a man to significantly tilt these odds in his favor. And perhaps the most critical point here, avoiding marriage doesn't avoid a risk. It often guarantees worse outcomes. If you look at unmarried families, the median income is drastically low, just $17,730, and the child incarceration rate soars to 1.51%. So marriage may be a calculated risk, but avoiding it often locks the family unit into a guaranteed position of socioeconomic disadvantage. The question is not risk versus no risk, but manageable risk versus guaranteed systemic risk.
That is a compelling way to frame the debate, though I would caution against equating avoiding marriage with a guarantee of the worst possible outcomes seen in cohabiting statistics. Many men who avoid marriage maintain high personal incomes, thereby mitigating the financial disadvantage you cite. But let's delve deeper into the financial burden, as this is where the asymmetry is most acutely felt.
Okay.
You noted the 50% drop in household income post-divorce and the father's subsequent 16% increase in work hours.
Yes. And the key issue here is that the man is increasing his labor, yet facing a severe personal decline.
I would frame that income decline differently by introducing the concept of economies of scale. A substantial portion of that initial 50% drop isn't punitive. It's an arithmetic consequence of structural reality. I mean, when one household splits into two, you instantly replace one rent payment with two, one utility bill with two, and you often double the fixed costs of food and transportation, even if the total shared income remains the same. The household budget collapses precisely because that financial efficiency of cohabitation is lost.
And that may explain the initial drop, but it doesn't excuse the disproportionate burden placed on the non-custodial father in the long run. The structural legal process is, yes, designed to ensure the economic stability of the custodial parent, generally the mother, who is now tasked with establishing a separate home. But the consequence of that design is that the man is often paying into a system while facing a persistent personal financial decline.
Exactly.
I mean, consider the child support mechanism. The man is working 16% more hours post-divorce. Yet when he does become the custodial father, which, as we established, is rare, he receives a child support award far less often, under 30% of the time, compared to custodial mothers who receive awards over 79% of the time. The financial system designed to create stability for the primary caregiver is structurally rigid and provides little reciprocal support when the roles are inverted. It leaves men on the short end of the stick.
That discrepancy in support receipt is certainly an empirical fault line in the current system that demands scrutiny. However, we have to return to the ultimate measure of success, which is the creation of stable, successful human capital for the children. That is the utility we are purchasing with the risk of marriage.
Right.
But that assumes divorce, even with the subsequent income loss and residential shocks, which include moving to a lower-income neighborhood that drops quality by 7%, it still yields outcomes superior to never-married households. The structural cost of paying support, even if it is asymmetrical, is framed in the law as a necessary cost to secure the chance for superior child outcomes compared to the alternative.
And that alternative status, unmarried cohabitation, is statistically linked to even greater disadvantage, which suggests that the goal is worth the financial hazard.
But that assumes the man has the power to sustain that stability long enough to secure those outcomes.
And that brings us precisely to what some researchers call the age of vulnerability. If a man prioritizes his children's long-term success, the data suggests the greatest benefit is derived from stabilizing the family unit during the critical early years. We have concrete evidence that the deepest, most durable negative effects on children, a 9% reduction in adult income by age 25, a 45% increase in mortality risk, and a 60% increase in teen births, are all tied to divorce exposure during early childhood, specifically ages 0 to 5.
Right.
So, the smartest course for the man committed to his family is therefore commitment to the family unit during these sensitive developmental periods, showing a clear intent to manage the risk timeline by delaying divorce until the child is older. This suggests that even if divorce occurs, the risk can be strategically contained.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that, because your argument relies on a flawed premise that the man has control over the timing of the divorce. Given that wives initiate the split 66% of the time, how exactly does a man committed to the project delay a divorce filed by his wife? It is a contract that for him is terminated at the sole discretion of the other party. The data suggests he is often reacting to the dissolution, not controlling its timing.
That is a significant challenge to the notion of strategic timing, I'll grant you. But even if we concede that timing is largely externally dictated, how does that undermine the value generated by stability during those early years?
It undermines it because you're treating divorce as a single, finite shock that can be managed simply by its placement on a timeline. I argue that the detrimental effects, such as increased incarceration risk, they persist substantially until children are nearly 20 years old. So delaying it doesn't negate the long-term risk.
Okay.
Furthermore, divorce introduces new and potentially irreversible risk factors that compromise the man's investment. When a marriage ends, it doesn't just split the current family structure. It creates what sociologists call a bundle of treatments. And this is a really crucial concept.
Could you elaborate on what you mean by that, a bundle of treatments?
Absolutely. The legal decree itself is just the starting point. The bundle of treatments refers to the combined cascading shocks that follow the legal process. The immediate financial decline, the necessary residential moves that degrade neighborhood quality, the psychological stress of parental conflict, and, critically, the introduction of new family structures. These are multiple compounding negative effects that persist across time.
I see.
And that new family structure is where the man's investment is further jeopardized. Within 10 years of divorce, 55% of children have a stepfather. The introduction of these step-parents can diffuse parental attention and financial resources. There is also a risk related to something called solicitude. This is an academic term, but it simply means the specific attention, vigilance, and care the child receives. Studies suggest that a new step-parent can dilute the quality of the biological father's solicitude, especially for non-custodial fathers, further compromising his long-term interest in his children's well-being and success, even if the divorce itself was delayed. The risk doesn't end with the legal decree. It just changes form and becomes this multifaceted family reorganization.
But that speaks less to the failure of the institution itself and more to the failure of effective co-parenting post-divorce. A man committed to the well-being of his children has to select a partner who will commit to collaborative, child-centered co-parenting irrespective of their future relationship status.
But you are asking the man to rely on the ex-spouse's good faith in a high-conflict, high-stakes legal situation. The structural risk remains fixed. 66% initiation by women and overwhelming custody loss for men, regardless of co-parenting intentions. And this brings us back to my core position. The smartest course of action is defensive entry. Given the hazards you cannot control, men must rigorously screen prospective partners against known statistical predictors of dissolution.
That focus on screening, it borders on treating marriage as a financial transaction to be insured against rather than a shared venture to be maximized. What specifically are the screening metrics you endorse?
The metrics are based on established statistical correlations. First, avoid marrying a cohabiting partner. Cohabitation prior to marriage increases the divorce chance by as much as 40%, likely reflecting a sliding into marriage dynamic rather than a conscious deciding to marry commitment. Second, avoid marrying someone who has been divorced previously. The risk is immense. You're 90% more likely to divorce if both partners have a prior marriage. Third, yes, even looking at occupation, knowing that statistically stable professions like agricultural engineers have a 1.78% divorce rate, while others, like dancers, have a 43% rate. These statistics reflect underlying lifestyle and stability factors that must be factored into the defensive assessment. The institution itself is hazardous. The only logical course is mitigation and defense through preemptive risk screening.
You know, I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're focusing entirely on defense against the downside rather than active commitment to the tremendous upside. The utility of marriage is derived from stability and its powerful correlation with superior life outcomes, higher adult income for children, dramatically lower mortality, and lower incarceration rates. The defense you speak of, marrying someone without a prior divorce, avoiding cohabitation, is simply the careful selection and shared commitment that ensures the upside. If you are aligning on fundamental values and selecting a partner who demonstrates stability, you are maximizing success, not merely avoiding failure.
Okay.
The data confirms that selection works, but it needs to be targeted at core compatibility, not just superficial occupational categories. I mean, consider the measurable difference in political and religious alignment. Couples who identify as conservative have a 28% divorce rate versus liberals at 37%. These are large statistical differences that point towards strategic alignment of core values, which are the true protective factors.
So you're saying
If a man approaches marriage with high standards, marries later, aligns on values, and commits fully, he has dramatically reduced that population-level risk of 50% to a manageable level, allowing him to benefit from the profound advantages the institution offers for success and generational wealth. Marriage, properly entered and sustained, is the greatest path toward success for both parents and children.
our discussion really highlights the profound tension facing men today when evaluating this institution. I maintain that marriage today must be viewed primarily as a high-stakes financial and custody contract, where the rules of dissolution disproportionately favor the spouse who initiates the split, which, as we've said, is predominantly the wife. The financial hit, the increased labor, and the near-certain custody loss demand extreme caution and defensive planning before entry. The contract is just inherently risky for men.
And I conclude that the debate hinges not on the existence of risk, which is inherent in any major life decision, but on the potential upside and the measurable protective factors that mitigate that risk. Stable marriage remains the single strongest predictor of positive long-term outcomes for children, including higher adult earnings and lower mortality. The smartest course for men is not avoidance, but a rigorous commitment to the known factors that sustain a stable union, recognizing that the benefits far outweigh the risks for a properly selected partnership.
You see, the data reveals that divorce isn't just a simple separation, but that bundle of treatments we discussed, a cascade of financial decline, neighborhood deterioration, increased parental distance, and new family structures. Understanding the complexity of that bundle and its generational consequences is essential for any man navigating the decision to marry in the 21st century.
A definitive individual conclusion remains complex, but the necessity of engaging rigorously with these statistical realities, assessing both the risk and the generational reward, is absolutely clear. Thank you for this rigorous exchange.
Oh, hit the like button and subscribe. And hit that damn bell.